Morning, everybody. So Rich and I were in Qatar on a ministry trip not too long ago, and after a beautiful and very busy weekend of ministry, our friends decided to spoil us and their kids by taking their kids out of school and spending the day going to the world's biggest indoor roller coaster. So I'm not a massive fan of roller coasters, but I wanted to be a good sport, and so I'm standing in the queue, and standing in the queue means I've said yes in a way. It's like a yes, maybe, yes, probably, or yes, we'll see when I get to the front. And we're in a yes series right now, which started 3 weeks ago, the fact that we've been invited to say yes to a proposal from God. That at Mount Sinai, all those years ago, after the people of Israel had been rescued from slavery to the Egyptians, they arrived at Mount Sinai, and there was this proposal where the 10 Commandments were given, and we learned that actually it's most accurate to see that, and the Jews to this day see that moment as a day of a wedding proposal, a marriage proposal. The reason being is that actually the whole thing was patterned according to a wedding proposal. And those 10 Commandments were not so much God saying, I've rescued you from slavery so that you can be my slaves instead, with a whole bunch of killjoy rules, but instead he said, I've rescued you from slavery, and I want to put some life-giving boundaries around you as a community so that everybody can have space to flourish and to thrive. And two things that we said were important about that day that we were noticing is that, first of all, it was characterized by thunderings and lightnings, or otherwise interpreted as tongues of fire, and that it was 50 days after the Passover, where the blood had been painted over the door frames while they were still in slavery, that saved them from death. And so this 50-day later celebration was known as Pentecost. Fast forward about 2,000 years at the time of Jesus, when Jesus died that year on Passover, and the blood of him, the Lamb, was on the wooden posts, saving people from death. 50 days after that Passover, there was the usual annual celebration of Pentecost, but at that Pentecost, once again, there were tongues of fire. Once again, there was this proposal, and it was a new proposal, a different proposal, and it came with a better word and a better covenant. And that was how the church was birthed. And I don't know if you ever pay any attention to these graphics that Sade and the team so beautifully put together, but some thought has gone into it. So the one for the proposal was full of sparks and separate little shoots off of fire going. And each one since then has been a single flame, all different, a flame where a life has caught fire by that spark to say yes to the proposal of Jesus. And we're hoping that through this series that each of you too would receive a spark of the proposal to say yes to God, that your life would be set on fire in a way that would change the world around you. If I've lost you, come back to me now. We were in a queue about to go on a roller coaster, right? And I was saying, yes, maybe, yes, probably, yes, we'll see. Well, the moment came when I actually had to step into the roller coaster and click in, and now it was, yes, ready or not. And so I braced myself, and I was just ready to be shot forward and had my lean in, and as the roller coaster started, it shot us backwards. I was not expecting it. It was not something that I had anticipated at all. But the good news was my yes of a click-in was sufficient for the mechanism of the roller coaster to hold me even when I didn't know or didn't expect the direction that it took me in. So this morning you are invited to say yes to Jesus, to just click in. You don't have to know the direction that he's calling you in. You don't have to have this great idea of where he's taking you. All you need to know is that you say yes to him. And after that, the entire mechanism that he will put around you will be enough to keep you safe, whether you go in the direction you were expecting or whether you go in a completely different direction. So I have choreographed and taught a number of wedding dances in my day. And the way that you teach and choreograph a wedding dance is very different to how you would do, say, a chorus for a show where there's lots of dancers on stage and you all have to know the entire sequence of the moves for the whole song. In a wedding dance, it's different. There are a few moves that you have to know. But the most important thing to learn is for a groom how to lead. And the most important thing for a bride to know is how to respond, how to follow, how to read his movements, so that if his arm is lifted up, you know you have to go under. You need to keep the small of your back in his right hand, so that when he pulls, you go with it. When he goes to the side, you lean into it. When he pulls back, when the pressure is less on the small of your back, it's the responsibility of the bride to lean back into the hand that is moving away. It is a bit like that as we say yes to Jesus. Like the roller coaster, like the dance, we say yes to the dance, yes to the partner, not necessarily knowing the directions that he will take you as we go. And so today's sermon is all about the directions of the dance and where he's led me. This is obviously a very personal, my name is in the title. It's a very testimony-driven series of how I've said yes and how he's led me in many different directions as my life has gone on, and how you too can say yes to being led wherever Jesus takes you, as long as you say yes to the dance partner. So last week, John introduced us to a Hebrew word, hiddenness, which is this beautiful word that we read in the scripture. It's translated most often as here I am, hiddenness, here I am. And it's this, not just a here I am as in didn't you know where I was? It's here I am as in at your service. Here I am. It's the call to Moses from Moses in the bush. Moses, he says, here I am. It's the call to Isaiah where he says, here I am, send me. And he introduced us to the fact that this hiddenness, this before you ask, my answer is yes idea is not only to come from us, that actually it came from God first. That was his proposal. His proposal was, here I am, will you accept me? This is a partnership, a marriage. He's not calling us to be his slaves. He's calling us to partner with him, to bring his kingdom, to build a home with him where people, including us, can thrive. But I found it very interesting that as John quoted from Isaiah 65, where God says, here I am, he chose not to quote from the first reference of hiddenness in that chapter. The first reference is much clearer. It seemed to me that John would have preached from there, but when I went to look into the passage a little bit deeper, I saw that the first time God says, here I am, he says it completely heartbroken to Israel after his first proposal at Mount Sinai. Isaiah 65, verse 1-3, God says this to them: I was ready to be sought by those who did not ask for me. I was ready to be found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation who was not called by my name. I spread out my hands all the day to a rebellious people who walk in a way that is not good, following their own devices, a people who provoke me to my face continually. And he goes on to speak about his heartbreak as his first proposal was met with rejection and with pride and with it being thrown back in his face. There is no proposal, friends, without love. God loved us. That's why he came first with a proposal. That's what he wanted desperately, a loving partnership relationship with us. But his first proposal, the world didn't recognize. They did not respond the way that he had anticipated, the way that he had hoped. And so he changed his way. And he changed the way he proposed when he sent Jesus. And that moment that we read about in Acts 2, where the tongues of fire came and the church was birthed, that was his second proposal. And in Isaiah 65, which is long before that moment of Acts 2, he speaks about Acts 2. He speaks about that day when he's going to initiate the marriage proposal that we are now invited into. And God wants to, in that passage, he says, I want to establish a different, better covenant. He says, behold, I create a new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered. Be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. He says, in this new kingdom, there'll be no premature death. Children are not going to be born just to be sent off to war. It's not going to be like you build houses, but then other people live in them. Or you plant fields and other people get to eat of them. No, in this new kingdom, there will be beautiful boundaries that allow people to enjoy the fruit of their own labor. And then we arrive at the passage that John did read in verse 24. He says, before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb shall graze together. The lion will eat straw. There's going to be no violence in this new world. Dust will be the serpent's food. There's nothing that we have to be afraid of. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. This is the kind of partnership he's inviting us to. This is the kind of marriage that he's inviting us into. His proposal is utterly, utterly beautiful. He's obviously, a proposal of marriage comes with an intention to build a home together. And in this case, to build an entire kingdom together. That is what the proposal is for. In a lot of cultures, and we notice that a man will get down on one knee to propose. Have you ever wondered why he does that? It is a position of humility and service. That's what he's offering her. He's getting down into a position of humility and service. I had a friend who his mom taught him that when he went on a date, he was to open the car door for a girl. And the reason she taught him that is because it was a way of him saying, if this date goes well, if we end up together, this is how I'm going to serve you. I'm going to serve you and protect you and make a way for you. That's why he would open the car door. But she also taught him how to know whether this was the one he should marry. If, while he was walking around the car to get into his side, she leant across the seat and opened the door for him, that was the one. You see, it is a two-way partnership relationship. What is the right way to respond to a man who gets down on his knee to propose? It is to get on the same level as him. Whether you pull him up onto his feet, or even better, if you drop down on your knees and take his hand in your face and say, yes, yes, I will enter a life of humility and service with you as we partner together to build a home in which we and our family and others can find a safe space to belong. That's what it should look like. It shouldn't look like, and let this be a warning to any of you single men, if you are down on your knee offering service and a life of love to a woman, and she is happy to stand up here and examine the ring, run. Don't marry a girl who's happy to lord it over you when you serve her. Marry a girl who's willing to get down on her knee. You see, Israel didn't get this right. God proposed this beautiful, loving, serving relationship where they would build something for the rest of the world. And Israel responded with pride. They responded by setting themselves up against the rest of the world, by thinking that they were better than. And so God realized that not only did he have to propose in humility as God willing to marry humanity, but he also had to become human to show humanity how to respond. And so Jesus left heaven in humility to show us the accurate, appropriate response to the proposal of God. As we follow Jesus, as we say yes to this proposal, you will find that you're called in many directions, but you are very likely to have your first call to be called downward. Called downward into humility and service. That was Jesus' first direction, as he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. We read in Philippians 2 that we should have the same mind as Christ. We should think like him. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours. You get to think like him in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And this passage teaches us about how to show humility and that our mind should be like the mind of Christ. So my dance with Jesus began on a youth camp as a young teen. We always talk about the first act of obedience when we say yes to the proposal of God, that our first act of obedience should be baptism. We should get baptized under the waters to show that we have laid down our lives and that we will follow Jesus and he lives in us. I was very surprised on youth camp after I put up my hand to say yes to Jesus that my first act of obedience was to put up my hands when they asked who wanted to clean the toilets. It was not something I expected. I didn't expect my hand to shoot up when they said, who will clean the toilets? We're having bungalow inspection today. And what I expected even less was that I would enjoy it. You see, when that spark comes into your life, when you're filled with the Spirit, you might be surprised the direction it leads you. And you might be surprised that you enjoy it. And I scrubbed those toilets cleaner than they've ever been in their lives. And what I did also, which was equally surprising to me, is that when I went home from camp a couple of days later, I offered to clean my parents' toilets. And when those were all clean, I went next door to my grandparents' house and cleaned theirs. I can only imagine my parents, who were not churchgoers, watching their daughter, who was not previously remarkably skilled or passionate about toilet cleaning, coming back with a changed life. And all they could see of my changed life is that I had been called downward, that I had a newfound love for humility and service. This is a partnership, this marriage proposal. It's a partnership of love, but it is going to be a partnership of hard work. It is going to look like service as we accept this proposal. It's going to look like bringing the kingdom. You don't establish any home without hard work, without painting and cleaning and fixing and doing gardens and goodness knows what all that you have to do when you're trying to maintain a home. How much more a kingdom in hostile territory? We're going to have to tame and cultivate. We're going to have to conquer. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves and offer blood, sweat, and tears in order to establish this kingdom. Friends, when you are in a time of war, you don't say, no, that's not the job I was trained for. That's not my preference. Thank you. But no. In World War, women became industrial workers. In the South African wars, children learned to become gun loaders. In times of war, you become skilled in whatever is needed. And we have expected and have already experienced that a lot of us are going to be awakened to some of the calls of God over our lives, some of the things and projects and ministries that He's put in you. And you're going to say, I remember what God wanted me to do, or I've heard again what God wants me to do. But I hope that some of you also come forward, not only with big new projects, but with a willingness to serve in something that's already happening. A willingness to step forward and say, where is there a gap in kids ministry? Where is there a gap in recovery? Where is there a gap on a Sunday? Maybe even it's cleaning toilets. Our next call is often a call inward. It was for Jesus. In Matthew 3, verse 16, Jesus was baptized, and immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming to rest on him. And behold, there's a lot of beholds, like this is a big moment, right? That's being described. A voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." We're talking about a moment that is glorious, that is big, that is clearly an inauguration, a launching, you would assume, of an immediately public ministry. But if we turn over the page to the next chapter, the next verse reads, "And then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil." It's not a glorious next sentence. And so often, if it was for Jesus, this inward call when he was possibly not expecting that, possibly if he looked at all the circumstances, it looked like the Spirit of God was leading him outward. But remember that we are to be led by that flame, that tongue of flame that is representative of the original pillar of fire that led the Israelites around the desert. And we read in Exodus, when they were being led around the desert, that when the fire stood still, they stood still. And when the fire moved, they moved. And it was the same with Jesus. The fire moved him from that moment as it came to rest on him into the wilderness. And so that is the direction that he went in. Jesus was called inward. Richard mentioned in his sermon in the series that part of our yes journey looked like, and we're talking 20 years ago or so, 21 years ago, looked like leaving professional careers to work at the church or on the church. And I'm careful with my prepositions here because all of us are called to work as the church. All of us are called to works of ministry, but God only needs a few to work at the church and on the church. And we felt that that was what we were called to. And he mentioned that in order to do that, we had to cut our salary by 80%. You know, that 2 weeks ago was the first I heard of that. That's how important it was to us at the time. I knew that we cut our salary, but it wasn't something we deliberated over because we'd said yes. We'd clicked in. We clicked into the roller coaster ride, and it was not a huge factor. There was, however, a big factor for me. I thought we were going into an outward direction. I thought that I'd answered the call downward to clean toilets however many years earlier. I thought maybe this was the call outward or upward. This was possibly a time of public ministry, a time of influence, responsibility, maybe even a time of leadership. I was very surprised to discover that for me, this moment was actually a call inward. Because when Richard became an elder, my 26-year-old husband became an elder, I thought that sounded very important. But I was 8 months pregnant at the time. And so when his world changed to look like public ministry, my world changed to look like 3-hourly cycles of nursing and burping and laundry and nappies. And it just was this Groundhog Day. And I felt like I'd given up this beautiful, exciting career where I was surrounded by 100 research and development engineers to live in this Groundhog Day where I'd told God I would go anywhere and I would do anything, and he'd called me to go nowhere and do nothing. That's how it felt. It was a surprising call inward, motherhood, for me. I wasn't expecting it. But again, we must remember that we want to follow every move of the Spirit. Sometimes, for your help, if you're in a season of being called inward, sometimes you may be feeling God's Spirit wooing you towards a time of solitude and reflection and a time to go on retreat and be alone with Him. But often, a call inward feels like a handbrake to where you were going, a handbrake to your outward call, a handbrake to the momentum that you had. It can often feel like this roadblock as opposed to this wooing into this beautiful desert place. And I mention that because it's a difficult feeling when it feels like you've stopped your call. But actually remember that our first call was not to outward or to anything in particular. Our call was to Jesus. It's to being clicked into the roller coaster, so to speak, so that when it moves backwards, I'm not surprised. I am surprised, but I go in that direction in any case. It's to remember that hand on the small of my back, if I feel it lighter, if I feel it going backwards, I need to push into it. And so it might be that God pulls you into a time of inward movement, but more often, it feels like God is retreating. It feels like He's far from you. It feels like He's distant and you can't feel Him anymore. He is still pursuing you in those moments. Sometimes He pursues you actively. Other times He pursues you by pulling back a little bit and inviting you to follow Him into that pulled back place, inviting you to lean back as He moves backwards. We're called downward, we're called inward, and sometimes also we're called outward. Outward would be that time of being called into public work or public ministry. It's these works of ministry that the church is called to. And this can often feel like the call. Like this is my contribution to the world. This is the call over my life. But these times of being called outward are seldom left with consistent momentum. God often changes direction to make sure that we're not following the momentum. We're not following the big purpose. We're always following Him. And so the outward call looks like, to me, and as I even read the scriptures to Jesus, it's an outward, inward, outward, inward. There's this constant movement so that we're staying connected to the hand and not to the direction. The reason being is that as humans, we are very susceptible to pride and to self-importance. And we need to constantly have our intentions, our motives tested. It looked like Abraham being told, you're going to father the nations. And he picks up this call and then it's lay down your son. Okay. But this son is the call. It's going to come through the son? Yes, but lay it down. Okay. I'm testing whether you're holding on to me or whether you're holding on to only the call. So I'll try and tell you my testimony of this, but it is going to sound like a lot, and it's going to sound like I'm giving you inward, out, because that's how it felt to me. And so that's intentional as you listen to some of the direction changes for me over possibly maybe a 10-year period or so. So we were at this church, and then we felt called to lead a church down the South Coast. And so it was this outward, yes, we're ready. And so we went down the South Coast to South City Church, and when I arrived there, I was pregnant. So it was, again, inward. And then now I'm embracing this parenting journey, so I start blogging and I'm writing parenting blogs, and it initiates a call outward where I'm now invited to speak at various events and various churches, and so there's this outward call. But as I do that, again, I'm told that my daughter, who I've just put into school, she needs to come home because she's only a few years into adoption, and she still needs to bond with me, and so it's back home again, and it's inward. And then the blogs take off, and they turn into a parenting book, and I'm invited to be on TV, and the book is a big success, and I travel to Cape Town to go and be on TV, and then I fall, and I'm in bed for 3 months, and it's this inward momentum. And then we hand over South City Church, and we come here to this church, and we believe that God's calling us to lead Anthem, and we say yes to this call to lead Anthem, and we speak to Piet, who was leading the church at the time, and he says, no, I haven't heard that at all. And so God says to us, okay, you are willing to pick up Anthem for her sake. Will you lay her down for her sake and leave the city in order to not cause confusion here? And so we say, yes, we'll do that as well. And so we take a job in Joburg. The day that we accept the job in Joburg, Piet gets a word from God, and he phones us and he says, actually, sorry, it is for you. And there's this Isaac on the altar, let go, pick it up again. And so we pick it up again. And guess what? When we start leading here, I'm not pregnant. And so I'm so excited. I'm like, it's going to be an outward call today. And literally the month we take over, I'm standing over here, and every Sunday I am drenched in tears because I can sense God saying to me, you need to bring all your children home. It's time to homeschool and disciple this lot that I've given you. And I'm like, God, it's inward again. And so there's this constant outward, inward, outward, inward. Hiddenness is a journey of being ready to say yes to anything, being clicked into the yes to God. It's leaning into his hand and saying, I'm in it. Whichever direction you take me, the yes is to him. And the proposal is so beautiful, it's worth it. And as you go on this inward, outward journey with him, you will become more and more ready to have the hiddenness yes. It's before you even ask. Whatever you say, you know my answer, God. I've changed direction with you now how many times? I'm now relaxed into the roller coaster. I'm not anticipating a direction. I'm just relaxed. And in that moment, we have a car accident. And our daughter ends up on an operating table with her brain open, her skull open. And I go to the bathroom mat and I say, God, please be careful what you ask me, because you know my answer. Please don't ask me for her. Please don't ask me to give you her life, because I have already decided my answer. And I'm not going to get up off this floor with strength in any other way than through the hiddenness way. You already have my answer. And in that moment, he says, I'd like you to let go of your daughter, and I'd like you to hold on to me. Friends, that's not just for me in that moment. That's for all of us in every moment, whatever we're holding on to. Would you let go of your daughter? Would you let go of your son? Would you let go of your dreams? Would you let go of your calls? Would you let go of your marriage? Would you place every precious thing in the hands of God? And would you hold on to him? Would you say yes to him? And as you do that, you will go on a beautiful adventure, and God will be able to do miracles in your life, such as giving you back your daughter. But only because you say a hiddenness. Take me in any direction, I trust you. You cannot dance beautifully without trusting your dance partner. You cannot dip into a downward movement without trusting your dance partner. You cannot be lifted up in a movement without trusting your dance partner. You are invited into the most beautiful dance, and the world will watch, and the world will see, and they will be changed. Let it not be an awkward dance. As I have been learning to dance with Richard in the last, literally physically dancing together in the last 25 years. And it starts off so awkward when I try and put my ideas on where we should go next. As I try to lead, there can never be two leaders. And I need to just relax and say, I trust you, Richard. Where are we going now? On the dance floor. And let him lead. When we do that with Jesus, the dance can be beautiful. And it can change not just your life, but the lives of others as well. And then there's also the possibility of being called upward. An upward call might look like influence and responsibility. It might look like leadership. And for me, we were invited, called to serve this church the very first time 20 years ago. When we were called to serve this church, it was at a time, certainly in our circles, where women were not included in leadership roles in the same way that men were. And so the call was actually to Richard. Richard was called to be an elder here, and I was called to be an elder's wife. And because I said yes to anything, I was okay with that. I didn't struggle with it. I gave in to that. I had, as a young lady, felt leadership over my life. But when I was called to be an elder's wife, I said yes to it, and I went with it, and it was beautiful, and I really got comfortable in that role. It was rather nice being an elder's wife, because I got to hide in Richard's shadow, and he was making decisions, but Richard is a wonderful collaborative leader, and so he would always come home and let me weigh in on the decisions, and I got to share my opinion and see and exercise this beautiful amount of influence with zero responsibility whatsoever. Because when people threw eggs, I just hid behind Richard, metaphorically most of the time. And so 8 years ago, when I now felt God calling me into a position of leadership and responsibility, as well as influence, I found it really hard to answer that call. I had become so comfortable, and I felt like God reawakened a call on my life personally for leadership. And in that moment, I didn't want to do it, because we had been taught that a woman who felt called to leadership, it was grasping. And obviously from the earlier scriptures of Jesus not considering equality something to be grasped, grasping is a bad word when it comes to your call. And so I didn't want to grasp onto anything, and yet I still felt God calling me into this whole new direction that I'd completely laid down. And so he kindly first called me into leading Anthem Kids in a collaborative fashion. He used the prophetess Deborah to show me how a leader could reluctantly collaborate by calling together other leaders to lead. And that's how I led Anthem Kids 8 or 9 years ago. And then he said, all right, now step up to the next level. I want you to lead like Esther. Esther was only a queen because she was married to a king. And I felt that God said to me, you only have leadership in this church today because you're married to Richard. But what of the woman who's called into leadership who's not married to a leader? What of the single woman, or a woman with a call of leadership over her life when her husband has got a different call? What of her? For that reason, like Esther was called for such a time as this, and if she didn't do what was good on behalf of the rest of her people, it wouldn't be good for her. God said to me, it's time for you to rise up and to start a sisterhood and to call the women into positions of leadership. And so we did that. And only after that was I able to finally take a step into being a leader and a pastor and a teacher in this church, as God had been calling me to do. An upward call is dangerous. It's scary. You put into a position where people can see your life. You are in a position of influence, means that you can affect other people's lives dramatically, for the good or for the bad. And so it's a scary position. But when we look at Jesus, his highest call upward was a call to be crucified on the cross. That was the moment he was lifted upward. It was a position of death. And similarly for us, if we're feeling God calling us into a position of influence or responsibility, it's likely to come with many deep layers of death as we lay down our preference and agree to follow him whichever direction, whether it's downward, inward, outward, or upward. It's all the same, provided we are in his hand and doing what he is calling us to do with that tongue of fire, that Spirit upon us, going in whichever direction, humbly, submissively surrendered to the direction that He calls us into. This is not a progressive journey necessarily, friends, of downward and then inward and then outward and then upward. I found in my life it's more like downward, inward, outward, upward, downward, inward, outward, upward. It's a weaving, it's a constant, it's an infinity-shaped leading and following Jesus. It's remaining in His hand whatever direction He goes. The reason why we let the groom lead the dance is because he's the one going forward around the dance floor. He's the one who can see the rest of the floor. He's the one that knows that a change of direction unexpectedly and against momentum is necessary because someone else has stepped into that place on the dance floor. And so there's something unexpected and he needs to move. But we have to be able to trust Him and go with whatever direction He's leading, whether it's downward, inward, outward, or upward, as long as we're happy all the time. Will you say yes to Jesus, friends? Yes to that spark landing on your life. Yes to being set on fire. Yes to clicking into a roller coaster ride. Yes to leaning into His hand and to making sure that you are always connected to His hand so that you can read whichever direction that He is leading you in, and so that your life can be a beautiful dance which creates a safe place in which people can flourish and find God.